Once again, it's time for, I think it's called the Cult of Honesty. It's the place where we can get honest, intellectually so, spiritually so, and possibly about books like the Bible, etc. And so tonight we are going to create a little bit of tension. We're going to have a little bit of clash course. And so I have invited people like Brahe. He likes to push back. And so does William Caicedo Torres. And so does Nate Cunningham. And we have two of the wisest people in the world with us also tonight. And one would be Bob Greaves, and the other one would be Ozzy. And so they are going to be offering the wisdom and pushing back as well. And so I'm going to give it to Greg Brahe and see if he can do something magnificent. Go for it, Greg.
Hi, welcome, or thank you for welcoming me back. Not welcome. I started with the wrong word there, but I'm glad to be here and excited to be giving my pushback on the subject at hand today. Which, of course, the subject at hand is that William and Bob and Nate and you, Dr. Jones, are irrational completely in everything that you do, but specifically. In this case, it's that the belief in a God is is an irrational belief, is the statement that I'm making, and I have to qualify that to one end, that rational is a term that has a very much sort of a personal identification with it, and I don't mean this as an insult. I mean it as a literal description, using sort of the definition of rationality, and I also do need to qualify that it only applies if your goal is to have beliefs that accurately reflect reality. Because if your goal is to believe in an afterlife or in a loving creator, that is the end you seek, then of course believing in a God is the most rational thing you can possibly do. But rationality means that you are taking actions that best suit or have the highest probability of meeting your ends that you seek. So if your ends that you seek are to have your beliefs based on reality or reflect reality, then a belief in a God is not a rational belief. Anyone want to challenge me on that, or are we all just going to say, okay, and Greg wins, because that's going to be the end of the show, obviously. But
could I add a little something to that, Greg?
Sure.
As another atheist in the room, in my view, when we speak about irrationality, no position all by itself, no statement, no proposition, just by itself is going to be irrational. To say that something is irrational, or that a position is irrational, is really to speak about how a person gets to the position, in my view. No position all by itself is irrational. I mean, if I think I've got great reasons, and I think I've exercised all my cognitive abilities and talents and applied due diligence in arriving at my beliefs responsibly, I just happen to be operating under some misinformation, despite my best efforts to get the right information, then I can be perfectly rational even though I might have arrived at a false belief. So an irrational belief is a belief that I think has been arrived at incorrectly, improperly, imprudently, I think is maybe where Greg is going with this. But it says nothing about the veracity of the belief. You can have a rational belief in the sense that you arrived at it rationally and the belief be true, or it could be false, and you can have an irrational belief in that you were irresponsible or imprudent, and it could be true or false. So I think that the veracity of the belief, it can in principle be separated. So to say that a belief is irrational really, I think, is a different kind of statement. When we say that a belief is irrational, we're speaking in a kind of figurative term. What we're saying is, by my lights, and I'll go along with Greg here, I think that theism is ultimately a species of superstition, and I think that it is irrational in the sense that I don't think there is a genuinely prudent pathway upon careful examination to get to the position of belief in God. I think that ultimately upon close examination there's no way to get there that is rational. But that doesn't mean that people have been sloppy or lazy or anything like that. You can just be operating under some misinformation along the way. So you can be a rational person, nevertheless. The arguments that got you there are not rational, and if there's absolutely no pathway to get there, then of course I think we have to say that the belief is irrational. And I hope that's qualified.
It's very important to qualify as well that it does depend on your goals, the ends to which you are trying to seek, because rational is, I mean, by definition, it describes a sort of an action or having a course of action or doing something that leads you properly and with the highest fidelity to the end you seek. So you have something that holding a belief can be perfectly rational, even if the belief is something that you know to be false, if your goals don't include holding accurate beliefs. That if it's just you hold a belief because it gives you comfort and your goal is to be comforted right now, then so be it. But and that still is rational. So I have to qualify that it is only valid for me to say that a belief in God is irrational if your goal is to have your beliefs be as accurate based on reality as they can be.
Could I add one point to that, Greg?
Sure.
In my view, when it comes to belief, if you're in the business of having beliefs, you're in the business of modeling or representing reality. You're trying to picture reality correctly. So you're concerned with truth. So anyone who says, well, it's not so important to me if my beliefs are true, all I care about is how they make me feel, those people aren't really talking about beliefs. They're not really in the belief business. They're just using the word belief incorrectly, I would submit. I think that's kind of a sloppy way of speaking. So I think the word belief, properly construed in this kind of context, really is about trying to adequately and correctly describe reality as accurately as one is capable of doing.
It'd be more of the way you're describing it sounds to me more like a presupposition for purposes of using it as a tool, not necessarily something somebody actually embraces.
Yeah.
There needs to be a certain level of embracing before one can properly call something a belief.
Yeah. One has to be affirming or assenting to a proposition, for instance.
And Greg, you said something twice there that I'd like you to clarify, because you said it in two different ways. One time you said that that when a person claims that their beliefs are accurate based on reality, and earlier you said that they are accurate about reality.
Well, I realized as I said it, I think it was the second time when I said based on, that was not an accurate. What I intended to say with that was that their beliefs accurately reflect reality.
Okay, accurately reflect reality. Okay.
Based on, but accurately reflect reality. So they are the most accurate they can be, with the standard of accuracy, of course, being what actually is.
That's something else. But that's different. When you say beliefs that accurately reflect reality, you say one thing. But when you say accurately reflect reality within some certain measure, that's something different, because how can we be sure that we are describing reality that is unknowable the correct way?
Well, that's where I have to say it's not a matter of certainty. We don't have to know that we are accurately understanding reality. That is the ideal. Ozzy made the case that it's an implicit goal in holding a belief, that it is to accurately understand reality, and that means that if something in reality is demonstrated to conflict with the belief that you hold, then you have a problem, and you can't just deny the reality. But also that we have to sort of take a measure, I guess, a pathway that will reliably lead to the highest fidelity of our beliefs. That I'm having a hard time verbalizing that one right now.
Greg, I'm curious. This might sound like it comes from left field. Well, before I get involved, I'd like to see Nate. Do you have anything to say? Because Yeah.
Oh, I have a thing or two. Yeah, well, obviously, I pretty much disagree with everything Craig said, but instead of, maybe to start off on the same playing field, let's see if we can find some things to agree on. So, I think any theistic belief ever does not necessarily make one irrational, and it is not irrational. That would be like saying atheism is irrational. That's stupid. I'm not going to be the person that makes that statement. Like God killed my goldfish, therefore there is no God. That's not rational. So, much like I think an atheist, a rational claim for an atheist would be, I don't believe in a deity because I simply lack a belief. And a rational theistic position we can talk about, I'm sure we will in the next 2 hours, is I believe in a deity because X, Y, Z. And if it's equivalent to God saved my goldfish and resurrected it, that may be a little crazy. If it's reasoned and logic and critical thinking follow, then I think you perhaps wouldn't want to be the person that makes the claim theism is irrational as a blanket statement. Does that sound fair?
I understand what you're saying, but I still am perfectly comfortable making the statement that theism is irrational, and that has much to do with the fact that there's a variety of different beliefs that people hold for all sorts of reasons that are not the most reliable reasons for them to hold, and that somebody can rattle off a large list of reasons that they believe in a God, and yet upon examination, I think that the conclusion that they've drawn from the experiences that they've had does not or logically follow as a not only as an absolute, but even as a most probable conclusion.
Well, I think if
Let me ask you one more question here, Greg, if I could. Do you assert that there is no God?
I do not assert that as an absolute.
Okay, then since you don't, would you agree that the absolute assertion of atheism is equally irrational? And if not, why?
I don't know exactly how I can answer that question, because I do believe the absolute assertion that there is not and cannot be a God, as long as we sort of strictly define God, it can be made within any sort of self-contradictory definition of God, any definition of God that is simply known to be false based on everything else that we've seen in reality. I guess there's when we
God is
omniscient or omnipotence that throws it.
Yeah. Again, William, you weren't coming through very clearly. Say that again.
A deist God is a contradictory notion. Deist,
and that's where I said that it depends on how God is defined. A deist God, no, there's no self-contradiction in that, and therefore making an absolute statement against a deistic God that is sort of, particularly, I mean, the classical deism where God sort of created everything and then stepped back or even annihilated himself in the process, is sort of a completely irrefutable claim. But it's a matter then for why you would believe that to be true, which is where sort of the opposite end comes in of, okay, I cannot with 100% certainty say that that is not true, but I can with a 100% certainty say that that belief is evidence proof, that there is no way that we could possibly disprove such a belief. And it's nor prove it. It is a belief that is contrived entirely out of the human imagination and has no basis beyond sort of the.
Well, not only can we not, prove.
Sorry, go ahead.
So sorry, you were breaking up a bit. I don't know if it was.
No, I just paused for a long time.
I don't know if it's coincidence or providence. I'm good with the latter. But well, not only is it evidence proof, but there are also no deists here to talk to. So I feel like I want to have a substantive conversation, but I feel like if something's to come of this, we really need to focus on Bob, William, and myself as theists, and you and Oz as atheists, because we can talk about what ifs. I meet crazy Christians all day long. It's kind of my thing. I'm sure you meet crazy atheists all day long, and you're like, no, stop saying that, or please don't identify as an atheist. You're killing it. So I mean, is that cool? Like, let's focus on the individuals.
Absolutely.
And Greg, let me were you going to say something there, Ozzy?
No, I was just agreeing with Nate.
Okay.
Let's constrain the talk of God here to maybe the Abrahamic God or maybe a God of deism, but let's try to flesh it out a little bit. What kind of God we want to talk about?
Okay, let's so in the spirit of doing that, Greg, you also talked about two things: evidence, proof, and notions of God. I have my notions of who Greg is. Whether my notion is that you're a nice guy, or or whether my notion of you is that you're just a troublemaker and a troll. My question, William shakes his head yes. My question would be, what possible relationship do my notions of Greg have to do with Greg? If my notions are my notions of you, this is the sense that I'm making of you. To me, I would see that as something irrespective of who you are. So if people were to judge you based on my notions of who you are, or believe in you or not believe in you based on my notions, why should any notion of God held by any human being be understood as saying anything about God?
Well, I contend that that's the only God that exists. So,
perhaps
that people hold.
irrationally
So unless somebody can provide me an evidence or I can meet this, I mean, it's easy for us to test a claim when somebody has this sort of notion of me. If somebody was saying, well, Bob believes that Greg is like this, and Ozzy believes that Greg is like that, and William has this belief about Greg. You know what? Let's go talk to Greg and check these things out, and that's doable. But we can't do that with a God. That's something that's not. Well, we can talk to it.
How's that not too damn bad?
I'm making a case here about the rationality of the belief in gods, not necessarily the nature of God himself, if it does exist. I'm extremely hesitant, and I have a lot of difficulty every time I see debates about the subject, does God exist? Because I think that is an unprovable point. It's undebatable. That we can't say, does God exist? That's an absolute. All we can say is it rational to believe in a God? And that, I think, the resounding answer to is no.
Do you think it's possible that there are people who believe in a God over whom they possess no authoritative or certain notion?
That they believe in some sort of higher, sort of nebulous higher power that they don't give any sort of characteristics to other than saying it's godlike?
Yeah, or they may even have possibilities, but not anything that they would assert as possessing any kind of accurate reflection.
I guess let me narrow down what I mean by belief in a God here, if this might help that. Is that belief in a God is making the leap from I believe that this is possible to I believe that this is. Right. To just dropping that possible, going, and I believe that this is, or yes, this is actual, and beyond just.
Explain to me how that is in any manner irrational, though. I mean, because I'm having a hard time understanding what you mean by the word believe. I mean, if I were to assert that I know that God is, that strikes me as being highly irrational. But if I were to tell you I believe that God is, what am I saying?
Could I take a stab at that?
Please.
I mean, as I said before, when we speak of belief, when a person is in the business of believing something, they're trying to picture reality. They're trying to mirror or represent reality. So to say that I believe something is to affirm or assert a proposition. It's to endorse a proposition as true. Now, it's not to say that you assert it or endorse it with complete confidence. I mean, I have beliefs. I have certain political beliefs. I have beliefs about where I'm seated right now. I'm very confident about my beliefs about where I'm sitting right now. That I'm sitting here in Ontario, Canada, and I'm not in Brazil, for instance. My confidence in that is extremely high. My belief in my choice to have voted for a certain candidate in an election is nowhere near so great. There's all kinds of beliefs that I hold rather guardedly, and there are beliefs that I endorse with full confidence, with maximal confidence.
So we're talking about degrees.
Yeah, I think belief has to be understood to admit of degrees, but
So explain to me what the rationale is for the degrees of confidence, and I totally agree with you.
yeah,
What's the
well,
rationale for degrees of confidence?
well, rationality here has to be understood in two senses. A belief has to be warranted, and what warrants a belief depends on the nature of the belief. I mean, what warrants my belief that a certain political candidate is a good choice is going to be facts about that person's character that are known, his prior behavior, that sort of thing. Whereas if I say I believe that the sun is 93 million miles away, what's going to warrant that belief is a whole set of astronomical facts and scientific evidence having nothing to
That
do.
isn't really a belief, though. I mean, we talk that way, but that's just a real. But I think we're getting into equivocation. That's not the same thing. Using the word belief in that.
I
The
think
reason why
it
you
is.
believe the sun is 93 million miles away is because it is about 93 million miles away, and as the Earth rotates about it, that figure actually varies throughout
No, of
the.
course, but it's understood when you say that I believe that the sun is 93 million miles away, that the figure 93 million miles away is approximate, okay,
Right.
as opposed to 20 light years away, for instance, okay. I mean,
Right.
it's the same thing if you ask, um, are you tall, Ozzy? And no, I'm not. What does that mean? Well, it means I'm average height. I'm about the same height as most men my age and my generation. So I'm not tall. I'm not committing myself to any specific height. I mean, words like tall and short and heavy and overweight and skinny, and these are words that admit of a range. And when you say that the sun is 93 million miles away, it's understood that you are not measuring the distance of the sun to the nearest micrometer. And
Right.
similarly, when you say, I believe God exists, when you say that, you have in mind a particular conception of God. It could be different from someone else's, but when you affirm that you believe in God, you are affirming the belief in whatever God you happen to be thinking of, and you are affirming it with whatever degree of confidence you happen to have. Now, to be rational, it has to be that you have reasons that warrant that belief, whatever that belief is that you have in your head, and that the confidence that you have in that belief scales with the quality of the evidence. So if your confidence is too high relative to the quality of the evidence, you're being irrational in the degree of commitment. So you can be irrational in two respects. You can be irrational in that you have no business believing what you believe because you've got no good evidence; it's unwarranted. But you could also be irrational in that, yes, I have some evidence, but my confidence is too high. Or you could even have the opposite, where your confidence in a proposition is too low given the overwhelming abundance of evidence put before you. So there's two ways, it seems to me, you can be irrational.
So if and trying to be consistent with this, if irrationality has to do with an appropriate measure of the degree of confidence given the degree of confidence possible for the assertion, sitting in a particular chair possesses a certain radical material reality
Right.
that is demonstrable, and then believing in a particular candidate has to do with whether or not one trusts the sources and allegations about this person, which are not as trustworthy as determining that the chair is really there.
Right.
Well,
Right.
so when we're talking about the immateriality of God, I find it personally totally irrational to be even talking about evidence, because evidence is something that belongs exclusively to the material world. And so therefore we need to find something other than evidence to be thinking about when we're talking about the warranted belief in a God. And to me it seems that discussing evidence or the lack thereof is an irrational thing, unwarranted when we're talking about something immaterial. At least that's the way that I'm perceiving it. And
That's
so
a great objection. Could I respond to that?
Sure.
Unless someone is dying to jump in, I'd like to respond to that. It's a really good objection. When we talk about evidence, sometimes what we have in mind is something like material evidence, because much of the time when we're talking about evidence, we are in fact talking about our beliefs about the material circumstances around us. But here, in the case of God, we are presumably not talking about that. So I think the word evidence here has to be broadly construed. It has to be construed as to include things like logical arguments, reasons in general for believing. That's why I spoke of rational, warranted belief.
So how do we determine the
not
warranty of things that are that far removed from the solidarity of the chair?
Yeah, well, there you're going to have to, I think, appeal to logical arguments, and you're going to have to appeal to notions of logical consistency. How much sense of the world can you make if you introduce or posit a God? I mean, I think it's perfectly okay to posit. Oh, sorry, somebody had something to say?
Yep. Just a little thing, a question. Just a,
Sure.
a little question. What's the evidence that makes you think that you are actually in Canada?
The evidence that I'm in Canada? Well, everything speaks for it and nothing speaks against it. That is, everything that I know about Canada, the kind of country it is, what it looks like, its borders and stuff like that, its climate, its geography and stuff like that, the makeup of its people, the language that people speak here, its customs and stuff like that. Everything I know about Canada, I have evidence to corroborate that I'm in Canada on the basis of what I know about Canada. Now, if it turns out that I'm radically mistaken about even what Canada is, then it might turn out that I'm in Antarctica. But if what I understand about Canada is correct, then I have a very well warranted belief that I am presently seated in a chair in Ontario, Canada. So any confidence that one has in a belief is always predicated against a background of other beliefs. Our beliefs operate within a network of larger beliefs and commitments that you take as stable and background. So when we're trying to defend a belief in God, for instance, we have to take certain things for granted. You have to take for granted that you yourself exist, that you're thinking, that this God is something other than you, that there is perhaps a mind-independent reality or some such thing. There's all kinds of things that you always assume and take as stable, as sort of the foundation upon which you operate when you posit, planet X, a 9th or 10th planet in our solar system, or whether you posit a God. Now, with respect to Bob's question about what's going to constitute evidence for God, well, again, it depends on the kind of God that you're talking about. If you imagine a Zeus-like God that lives on Mount Olympus and interacts with people face to face, or perhaps the kind of Zeus-like God that you find in the Garden of Eden story in the book of Genesis, there I think that the evidence for that kind of God should be, the kind. I mean, it's a being that walks around, that has a look and a body and stuff like that. That's the kind of evidence that you would expect. The God of the philosophers, though, is nothing like that, and that God is going to have to be borne out, I think, by philosophical arguments, logical arguments, and appeals to consistency. What can you make sense of by positing this God, and is it possible that you can't make sense of certain things unless you posit such a God? Things like presuppositionalism, for instance.
Can I speak to that? I'm in the middle, actually near the end. I just started part 4 of Steven Pinker's book, How the Mind Works, and in this book he often goes into an evolutionary discussion about how he talks about how the mind works and how natural selection would have brought this kind of thinking about. And yet, I think that it is, as awesome as the book is, I think he's pointing out a great number of things that are true about how the mind works. I think it's also absolutely undeniable and very true that he is explaining how natural selection does this, not because he has any evidence or any proof that natural selection has done any such thing. And I'm not even arguing that natural selection hasn't. I'm just saying his language is simply putting it into that kind of a context because he can. And that therefore he is teaching things about the mind, and but why is he putting it into the context of natural selection? The reason is because it makes so much more sense when you do so.
Right. It makes sense. It's a kind of inference to the best explanation in his view. Yeah.
Correct.
Well,
Yeah.
But also coming from sort of the biologist standpoint.
From a different paradigm. The paradigm that I'm operating from, if it's one you don't accept, it's almost as if we're both incompetent to determine the warrantedness of the opposite paradigm when we're not a participant in that paradigm.
But it's a question, though. I guess I'd like to comment on the Pinker thing, because as sort of the biologist, when we come up with sort of these explanations to what happened in an evolutionary context, that's more of just positing a plausible scenario so that
Sure.
it's
Well, which is
anticipating.
and how is that any
Conjecture.
more irrational or rational than talking about God?
Well, because in that it's anticipating an objection and showing that somebody said or could say, well, how could this possibly evolve? So giving any demonstration of what could possibly have happened, given that we understand evolutionary theory to the degree that we do, it means and that evolutionary theory is as
Can I share with you my theory about why Pinker talks that way? Here's my theory. I find that every place in that book, when Pinker says something about the mind that could cause somebody who subscribes to evolutionary theory saying, watch it, Pinker, you're getting real close to saying some things that are problematic, he then goes into this a description that makes us understand very clearly what side of that argument he is on. And I think he's doing it to save face and to maintain his and not to say that he doesn't believe in that, and to be honest with you, not to say that I don't accept evolution. I do, but I think that he is doing that as a way of posturing himself inside the academic community while still having to say certain things about the mind that can be perceived as problematic to the paradigm.
I agree. Actually, he's trying to show some allegiances there, and in those places. I think I even know the kind of places
wish
you're talking about.
Do, because as a theist, I'll tell you this. I'll be honest with you. What evidence do I bring? I got nothing. I am admittedly naked. And I think it's just awesome that evolution makes a lot of sense and has a great deal of reasonable appeal to it. And to me, that's more than sufficient, and I don't think you need to do any more. It doesn't work for me when you do. That's one thing about the book I find disappointing,
Then I wanted to make
I would agree with that.
the second part there.
Yeah,
as well,
let Greg finish that. Yeah.
So the ending that you gave to that, sort of like, how are we any more justified coming up with these than beliefs in God? And sort of speaking to some of the other points you made about warrants and how we can even measure the degree of confidence that we can have in these warrants, I think speaks to a fundamental point that I am trying to make here, is that if we're going to hold a belief, and that belief is based on warrants that we can't even measure the reality of those warrants or that type of reasoning as it pertains to reality, then why would we have sort of justification in accepting that as true, and not just, again, a possible? That's where the leap going from what is possible to what is true is the difference here. That I have absolutely no problem relating as to what
belief there. To say that I believe something in the sense of theology, for some people may be the I think irrational claim that it is true, but to think but for me, a belief is something that could very well be true. Maybe it isn't, but I have enough confidence in it that I'm willing to risk it. It's a gamble. Now, but bringing us to something else, watching the other night.
That still, though, does that confidence thing. It speaks to what Ozzy was saying earlier when it comes to the level of confidence that we can have. We can be irrational by holding a belief in disproportion to the value of the evidence.
Well, okay, you're in a car that's spinning around, and you might need to, in order to avoid a horrible accident, you might need to turn to the left or turn to the right or hold steady.
I also want to make a quick comment to the other two theists.
What's that again?
Here, because I have over a year of experience hosting a show with Bob, and I know that you guys are new to this, but he. You need to be willing to just talk over him a little bit, and you guys are both very polite, and we'll try to give you the same is true for me. I'm gonna feel free to cut me off and interrupt me as well, but Bob is speaking so far for the theist side and almost entirely on his own, and I want to make sure that you guys know we want to hear your opinions, and please speak up.
Let me just say one last thing, and I'll shut up. Let me say one last thing, and I'll shut up and let you guys have more of the floor. I was watching this show the other night about about forensic files, and there's this situation of where this guy is found guilty of a crime, and the suggestion that he's not the guy, absolutely makes no sense, and the investigator and the prosecutor are totally committed to the idea that it is just foolish, unwarranted, and irrational to suggest anything other than this guy being guilty. And then 20 years later, DNA evidence demonstrates he's not the guy. What do we do? These are people who are scientists. They have what they believe to be warranted, and because I think that the evidence we have to deal with in terms of God is so immaterial, I think that it's almost irrational to talk about rationality.
But just because a belief is rational or irrational does not mean that it is true or false. It means that based on the available evidence, we hold the confidence in the truth of it in the correct proportion. Now, I will say, I mean, this is what I mean by saying that theism is irrational, is that there is no evidence that, given proper weight, leads to a greater than or equal to 50% probability that or I guess confidence ratio that a God exists, and that's what I'm basically saying here. Is that
given the way
if we are going to make the leap from it's possible to what was it? Given traditional
No, I said
theism?
given what it is you understand theism and belief to be, I totally agree with you. But Nate and Will, anything you wanted to bring in?
So much. Let me try to remember. Well, maybe the most recent thing. Maybe you can find some wisdom from this. But I really think, in theism, like, if I were in, I guess to start, it is important that what I believe actually be true. So if I can't know what absolute truth is, I can do my best diligence to find out or make my best case, and you can do the same. So I feel like, it would be dishonest for you to say, well, I'm to take any position other than you do, because I'm assuming that you're pursuing truth and honesty and, all this. Well, so am I. So I guess we have to start out for me to take any other position, it would be intellectually dishonest. For you to do the same would be intellectually dishonest. So if it's true that we can't choose our beliefs, there are beliefs. I think what we can do is seek out and search and, pursue this avenue of whatever, logic, reasoning, evidence, subject matters regardless of that. But you can start overturning rocks, and you may overturn rocks that, getting rid of like confirmation bias and things like this. But, in overturning rocks, you'll find things that either solidify your current beliefs and make them more resolute, or you may just uncover a rock that completely shakes your world, and you're like, you know what? My belief has been radically and forever altered because I searched. So I think, rather than saying, you're irrational, I'm not saying you are, but for one who would say, that's irrational to believe that way, well, is it irrational if you can't choose your belief? Or maybe you should just encourage them to do some more diligence. If you have evidence that supports, why what you think they believe is irrational, show it to them.
I think, though, that that's the same argument. In saying that it is irrational, it's an irrational belief, is making the argument that they're not giving it due diligence.
Perhaps,
if they did give it due diligence, then they would recognize that the belief is not warranted.
Well, perhaps, but first of all, I think no one's going to say I've been unfair. Yeah, I mean, you can't really do this 3 years on Google without turning over a crap ton of rocks. So I feel like I've done that, and lots of things. Because whenever I read book reviews, even it doesn't matter theism or subject matter. If I read a book review and someone tells me something positive about it, the first thing I'm going to do is go to all the negative reviews and find out the best reasons why people hate this book, or God, or the God that may exist that they don't know. I want to find the best reasons why people disagree. And that's where I want to start. So I don't want to build up a case. This just seems like a good rule of thumb. So I don't want to build up a case that God is great and all this other stuff, or this was a really cool book, and then read all the negative stuff and be like, oh no, this book says this because I read it, and now this is my belief. I want to start with the bad. And in doing this, I mean, granted, when I came to Google, I did have a God belief, but I really didn't know what the word apologetics meant. I'm just like, yeah, I believe in God, and I know why. What's apologetics? So, I was kind of starting on ground zero. And the more I uncovered about the arguments against God or anything really, in regard to theism, I'm like, some of them I've came across are reasonable. I'll say that. I think the most reasonable one is I don't believe in a deity because I simply lack a belief. Pretty much, I don't want to say blanket answer, but everything I can remember at the top of my head certainly nothing has dissuaded my belief. It's mostly made it more. I don't want to say made it more resolute because it's a pretty concrete belief, but I feel like there's a lot of weak stuff out there. And I don't know if that's because people try to grasp at straws, or if it's because of all the people who aren't particularly honest on one side or another, or have an agenda, or something like that they have to appeal to a fan base. But I really think I think I've said this already, but the most honest position is I simply don't believe in a God because I don't have a good reason to, or I do believe in a God because I feel I have a good reason to, and go from there.
What are the reasons?
Agree with you
though,
absolutely
right?
in that.
One thing, true diligence is something that strikes me as very subjective. Maybe like you are not exercising true diligence until you get to be an atheist. Is that what you're saying, Greg?
I guess it is implicit, isn't it, for me to say that you're not exercising due diligence because you're not an atheist. It's almost tautological. I'm defining that. Well, if you did, you would be. Therefore, since you're not, you haven't. I understand that objection, and it is a valid one. I guess the criticism that I have to make at least to respond to Nate, and I think it applies to you and to Bob as well, is that you are certainly not ignorant. You have a well-established knowledge base about the different, reasons people hold beliefs, about apologetics, about your own personal beliefs as well, and why you hold those. You're not coming from these beliefs, or coming to these beliefs without examination of them, and I personally, I have no problem granting that to you. So in your cases, I don't think that the diligence is in the gathering of evidence. It's or the lack of diligence in that respect is in the gathering of evidence. I think that your standards of weighing your evidence and of considering the evidence to draw conclusions about reality there are errors in this case.
Is this a contest? I asked that. It's a contest. It's almost like when life is over, if it turns out that I'm right, ha ha,
So an atheist can't win that contest.
Yeah.
I mean,
So that can't be the motive.
Yeah. Right. But to me that now I do think there are a lot of theists out there who are awaiting the vindication of God, and to me that is a useless thing. I mean, because the truth is we're here right now, and that much we know for certain. So to live in the here and now in a meaningful and practical and useful way is far more important than trying to live because of something you think is going to happen in the life to come. But but you're expressing this to me, I feel like this concept of irrationality it's almost like who gets to put the notch in their belt that their thinking has actually been crystal clear and properly critical and well thought out.
Bob, this is a
I don't think
philosophical
any of us
argument, though.
possess any of the kind of knowledge that possesses us. It's kind of like when lines go out towards eternity that are parallel, do they ever really meet? Whether they do or don't, they might actually meet down there, even if they stop being parallel. The farther away the thing we're talking about is, the less we really have the right to be so certain in talking about it, and the less the concept of rationality or irrationality even applies. Seems to me.
I want to jump in just for a second and say a few things. First of all, you guys are doing a magnificent job. We applaud you. We're having a great time here in the studio. I'd like to invite our audience to get a hold of your friends for the last hour of the show. We're going to have some fun. These guys are amazing, and Sean's going to put up on the screen your questions, your comments, and all of that. And so let's rev it up. Take it away, guys.
Who is talking?
I was in the middle of interrupting someone.
Go for it.
Okay. Bob, when you say that the question is sort of rarefied, the concept of God here is so rarefied, that maybe it's inappropriate to speak of rationality. Okay, well, maybe that's true, but if that's true, that really is surrendering to the allegation that this is an irrational belief. But it seems to be doing it by saying both sides are equally irrational here.
That would be true. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And
let me
saying
push
that,
back.
that it becomes a question that somehow we have. I mean, for example, what's the square root of what's the square root of 2? We call it an irrational number because we know that we can. It's useful to use that formulaically, but we really don't know what the number is. We can't express it.
Well, no, I mean that is actually a number that is used in higher
Definitely.
math all the time. That quantity
Right.
is used all the time. It is in fact a well understood quantity. It's just not expressible in a finite
Right.
number of integers, right?
Right.
That's all we mean by an
and-
irrational number. In
Right, but we call it irrational for a reason, and that would be because it's inexpressible. What if the notion of God is in some ways inexpressible?
Well,
That
to the
means that
extent
all the ways we try to express it are inadequate. But what does that have to do with whether or not the concept itself is inadequate?
well, if the concept is so inchoate that we can't express it properly, then we're not in a position to evaluate the veracity of any of the claim. If someone says, I affirm a belief in this proposition, but the proposition is so vague and unclear that you can't work out the deductive implications or consequences of it, then you're never going to be able to tell whether or not you've got good reasons and good evidence for it or against it. So I think that is sort of an escape clause that comes at the price of rendering the concept so incoherent that it delegitimizes any claim in support of it.
Only in terms of compelling others. I mean, for
Even
example,
to oneself. I would say even to oneself. I would need.
Okay.
I mean, the reasons that would convince me and the reasons that would convince another person can be quite different because against the background of my beliefs, I might have perfectly. I'll give you an example. I mean, I used to be a young Earth creationist. I had a kind of quasi Jehovah's Witness upbringing. And I don't think I was an irrational person then, any more than I think I'm an irrational person now. But I think that the belief that I had was ultimately irrational. But if you ask me, why, Ozzy, why did you believe that? Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, as I've heard you say, Bob. I really thought it was a good idea at the time. In light of everything that I believed and the information I had before me, it seemed to make perfect sense. And the concept was perfectly clear. There was nothing vague about it. If anything, it was to the degree that I could specify, it was the degree that I was ultimately able to recognize that there were problems with it that made the belief rationally unsupportable.
Well, I know that's where I'm at in terms of denying the possibility of God. To say
But again,
to believe,
denying the possibility is different than believing
Denying the
or
possibility?
not believing it.
Yeah.
That I don't deny the possibility of every.
Denying the actuality and denying the possibility.
Well, when it comes to something which, for example, denying the possibility of the chair, denying the possibility of the veracity of the candidate, denying the possibility of God, we're the farther we get away from the immaterial, from the material, the more difficult it is. You see, because I can't come up with any rational, warranted reason to embrace atheism. Although I'll tell you what, I have no problem believing that every atheist. No, well, I wouldn't say every atheist. That there are many atheists. Well, let me use Greg and Ozzy as an example. I don't think there's anything irrational that either of you are doing in possessing this conclusion as atheists. I don't. In fact,
we agree.
Exactly, right. And I don't, in fact, I don't see how I could even begin to make an argument that you're doing something irrational. I don't think that you can find the point at which I have slipped into irrationality in my belief in God.
I think
I think that I have many experiences in my own life that, for me, sufficiently warrant it to the point that I couldn't give it up even if I wanted to.
Well, to piggyback on, if I may, what Bob was saying, yeah, I think, our chief reasons, like myself and pretty much every theist I've talked to, I don't think any of them, their chief reason for believing in a God or theism or whatever it is they're claiming, are because of the things we present to non-theists, especially in some sort of a pseudo-formal debate.
Exactly.
These are because, the chief reason. And people are like, how can you believe this based on this text that there's a God and everything is right in the universe now? It's like we don't. It's like whenever we come to non-theist people, as theists, we're bringing our B game. Coincidentally, our B game seems pretty darn good. But regardless, our chief reason is because of, these people will say a spiritual connection, a personal experience. Totally understand it's subjective, but at least consistent with, Christian theism, it makes perfect sense per that this God wants this personal relationship with his creation, and then we say we believe largely because of these personal experiences. I understand that's subjective, but that's exactly what it is. No one's saying it's whatever.
I don't think there's a single theist out there who believes in God because of any of these arguments for God. There's not a single one who does so. And that's just the arguments they give to try to appear to possess rationality to those who don't. And to be honest with you, I really think that level. I think that kind of apologetics is useless.
Well, I think.
Bob, I said it's kind of the argument that Ozzy and I are making, that that you're right. Apologetics are kind of the way of making it look rational and to justify a belief. They're sort of ad hoc constructions to justify a belief that is already held. I think that there's not a way to go the opposite direction.
I want to take you up on
that's still
Nate's.
I'd say that again, Ozzy, and then let Nate continue.
I was going to say that still leaves Nate's challenge here, because if we all agree that sort of classical apologetics really is an effort to paint a veneer of intellectual respectability over a belief that is in fact held for different reasons, independent reasons, the kinds of subjective reasons that Nate is proposing, then what we really should be concentrating on here in this discussion is the sincerely held reasons and motivations that people have for believing in God. And now I think that those are not going to be good enough either, but that's maybe where the discussion should turn.
That's excellent. That is an excellent point. Nate.
I think something's happened in Canada. You're kind of getting fuzzy on your mic. But, well, I did only get about half of what I wanted to say out. So, as far as classic, traditional apologetics go, I think there are, lots of good evidence for certain things. Like the stories in the Bible, people at one time, Christian theism, that people thought at one time were false, like these cities don't exist. Well, now we have, uncontroversial evidence. It's like, hey, this city, yeah, it existed, and, all this stuff. So I think, the logic of intelligent design. So I think there's a lot of stuff that make really strong cases and offer, good logic or even pretty concrete evidence for certain things. But as far as, the core belief in a deity that is responsible for creating everyone and, especially the claims of Christ as a Christian theist, it is largely these things. And, I'll give you one more. Of course, critical thinking is important. So if you just have a near-death experience or an airplane comes crashing through, on the freeway, and you're like, wow, God saved me. Let's be real. Are we critical thinking people or not? Or people who, said they've been abducted by aliens or something like that. So that, I think, logic and critical thinking and rationale, one may say, are really is the backbone of any subject matter. So if I narrowly escape death, like in Final Destination style, it could totally be a God. It could totally be a coincidence. It could be some sort of confirmation bias. And I think if someone just jumps on the first thing that comes to mind, that's dangerous. But I think if we're all individuals and critical thinking is paramount in our lives or as a society or whatever, then we should be smart enough to rule this out. We'll never be fully objective, but we should make an effort to be as objective as possible. So if I'm like, okay, and especially, like my over 30 years of existence, the totality of evidence and this stuff happening over and over, I've got plenty of it that I thought this could be a deity. And it didn't hold that much weight. So it's over here in this pile that maybe someday I'll get back to it, but we'll call that coincidence for now. And then there's other things that I'm like, there is no other way. I would be dishonest to say this is attributable to anything other than a deity. So, you separate things. So it's not like every time something random happens and I'm like, ooh, that was close. Thank you. God did it. It could be, but it could be a whole myriad of other things. So I really think,
Unfortunately, the people who did not narrowly escape death are not here to give their side of that story.
Yeah, Nate, the fact that there are some people who are going to, believe on really bad reasons and stuff like that. that's really irrelevant to our discussion here. We want to sort of consider the reasons that you think are really convincing, that convince you. So my question to you and William and Bob would be, if you're going to affirm a belief in a God, it's got to be more than a bare logical possibility. Because to say I can affirm something is true if it's just a bare logical possibility is setting the bar too low, I think. Right? That's just saying if it's not self-contradictory, I have a reason to believe it. Well, no, that's not true, because there are too many things that are not self-contradictory, namely the set of all things that aren't self-contradictory, that I would have grounds to believe in. So that's, and some of those are going to be contradictory with one another. So the set of things that are not self-contradictory is too great, and those are mutually contradictory, and consequently we have to have reasons, positive reasons, or evidence, if you want to construe it more narrowly, for believing what we do. So my question would be this. What, if anything, in your experience, we're talking about subjective experiences here, what, if anything, in your experience is better explained by positing a God than by not positing a God? And how is it better explained? Could you sort of maybe flesh that out a bit? Any of you?
Well, I'll just say one thing real quick and then give someone else a chance. But to be fair to me, I think what I said was really applicable, because I think from the outside looking in, this is letting you into the mind of a theist for a minute. I think people will say, we'll qualify these things as one static, irrational belief, or something that's misplaced hope, misplaced faith. So I mean, I think it was pretty pertinent to our discussion. Would you agree? Like, some things carry more weight, and I just wanted to make that distinction for people who don't claim any such thing. Quickly, I would just say, the totality of my life experience. That's as far as I'll go now. It would be dishonest of me to say anything else, but I'll let someone else chime in.
I would say for myself, there has been, during my lifetime, I'm 62 now, since the age of 6, I have had a continuous sense of the presence of otherness, and I would say that even as a child, I recognized that this sense of otherness was not even being, in any manner that I could relate to, accurately being spoken of even in church, where I went to church. To me, it was an inexpressible otherness and a sense of presence that has been with me, I would have to say, constantly. I can't deny that experience any more than I can deny the fact that that my arms hurt from arthritis now. It is a sensation that is with me. It is part of my sensory perception, however it is that it may be contrived, legitimate or illegitimate. It is nonetheless my experience. It has been for me a companion, in a sense, for all those years. The other thing is that I fell into somewhat of a near-death experience and a vision back in the late 70s that I rarely talk about, because I don't like the way theists talk about it. But I fell into a vision where I was unconscious for close to 45 minutes, and in that I was very present with what appeared to me to be God. And this was a very powerful and radically strange experience for me, that also at that time was totally contrary to the kind of theology that I was in. At that time, I was very much a fundamentalist, and the nature of that vision was really destroyed my faith.
That's a really good. Sorry.
I have no way of dismissing this, and in many ways, the reason why I am the unconventional pastor is because of all the beliefs that I abandoned, in many ways, as a result of that vision.
Could I speak to that then, Bob?
Sure.
I really like that, actually, what you described there. You talked about the sense of the presence of otherness, okay?
Right.
And that this has sort of been attendant with, throughout your life.
Right.
And you said, and you don't have a way of dismissing it.
Even when I ventured into fundamentalism, I entertained that for a while as a theology of that otherness, and yet I found it to be woefully inadequate and academically absurd, and I had to abandon it, but I couldn't abandon the otherness.
Right. Okay. When we experience something, you can't just dismiss it. Your experiences are your experiences. If I feel a pain right now, even if there's nothing that causes or occasions the pain, right? If it's like a phantom limb pain, for instance, I can't deny that I'm in pain. So we don't want to go around denying that people have these experiences, and I would not be tempted to do so. And I think that these experiences are actually fairly common. The difficulty, though, of course, is it's hard to compare such an experience across individuals. And there's sort of mental contamination whereby people sort of adopt an idiom, a way of speaking about these things that sometimes creates the illusion of greater convergence on an experience than there might be. But be that as it may, you can't deny the experiences that you have. But the difficulty I have with that kind of experience as a datum in support of this otherness is that what leads you to believe that this sense that you have of the presence of an otherness is actually caused by or occasioned by something other, something out there, something transcendent or whatever.
I don't. In fact, that's why I am an agnostic theist. I don't believe there's anything in that experience that I can determine is actually valid. I can't, and I know I can't.
Okay, but now this is sounding a little bit like someone who has a phantom limb pain and who wants to say, yeah, I feel the pain in my hand, even though my hand was amputated, but I'm going to affirm that I have a hand there. I mean, it seems to me that a person is going beyond the phantom limb pain.
Well, a hand is something very material.
No, but it's an analogy. This is an analogy, right? In the case of someone with a phantom limb pain, they feel it.
Well, we can determine very carefully and very clearly that the hand isn't really there. We can do that, but we cannot determine that God isn't actually there.
But that's the point of the analogy. The point of the analogy is that in the case of phantom limb pain, we can establish, we have a verification procedure and a falsification procedure that can establish that the person is mistaken. In your case, you have no way of establishing if you're right or wrong, and
I'm lost to it. Right.
So what leads you to think that you should affirm the otherness as real, as opposed to it being merely a feeling?
Well, perhaps in some ways the inescapability of it, but it's also, but in dealing with that and struggling with that question, which I think is an excellent question, is what led me to eventually, declare myself as an agnostic. So that intellectually, I have nothing, but experientially and subjectively, not only that, my faith in God is, I would say, intensely firm and very central to my life.
Bob, what's interesting for me is that in the past you have described faith or your belief in God not as irrational, but as a-rational.
Correct.
You've said that it is sort of not within the scope of rationality.
Unfortunately, and that is as much a cop-out as much as it is just a too damn bad situation. That's the way it is.
I will accept that it is not rational, and if we quibble about if it is rational, irrational is fine. I'm just going to accept admission that your understanding is not rational, but I'd really like to hear why Nate and William think that their belief in God is rational.
Hey, in my specific case, it's just a set of experiences that make me think that actually these things that I feel are connected somehow with sort of a transcendent entity.
So I know, William, we had a conversation in the Facebook group as well that sort of covered this issue and more. And the question that I'm going to press you on to try to get you to answer it is not just sort of why you feel that this is a plausible explanation or it's rational, or I guess logically coherent. But that it is the best explanation as far as explanatory power, or and I guess within that requires the least number of assumptions for something that would have equal explanatory power.
Got cut out. What do you exactly do?
This is an appeal to Occam's razor here, that if we have sort of two solutions, basically that there is no limit to the human mind's ability to come up with ever more complex solutions or explanations to an event, an experience, or any set of data that we have. So I mean, the set of data that is your life up to today, all of the experiences within, can have sort of a infinite set of possible explanations that are not self-contradictory. And the explanation that you have personally accepted is that there is this transcendent deity that is there, and that is what you are experiencing. So my question for you is, what standards of evidence are you using that this transcendent deity is the best explanation, and it would not be an explanation with equal explanatory power to some of these experiences that you have?
Occam's razor is not looking for equal explanatory power; it's looking for the simplest.
Well, it basically states that.
Another way.
But let me. I guess it says that among propositions or explanations with equal explanatory power, then the one requiring the fewest assumptions is the one that should be accepted, given the information that's available.
Yeah, belief in God is a very simple assumption. There is a God. That's it. That's the end of it. I'm
Put it
done.
in tape.
No, it has to explain. It has to actually explain.
Right, but
Right.
well, how could I compare a belief in a God to other explanations? If we're talking about kind of orthogonal dimensions or things. In my life, specifically in my life, things seem to make more sense. The way I've lived, the things that I've done in my life, the way that I've been able to get to others and to speak to others and to help others and to let others help me. It makes more sense if somehow my experiences are part of some kind of a plan where I'm doing some sort of job to better the lives of the people that surround me. But how do I connect that to? Well, I think that it's similar. That's why I asked Ozzy a couple of minutes ago why he believed that he was in Canada. I suppose he believes he's in Canada because a lot of people around him think the same, and everything he can do to determine if that is true or not just gives him that impression. In my case, when I share my experiences with other people that don't know my personal experience from before, it just clicks.
William, could I try to flesh out some of what you're saying? I have a direction that your argument could go in. Tell me if this is if this is right or if I'm putting words in your mouth.
Okay.
I mean, you if I understand correctly, your belief in a God, whatever experiences you have that sort of lead you to think that there's a God, your conception of a God sort of ties together your worldview. You know, it might infuse your entire view, your entire picture of life, your map of reality. It might infuse it with meaning and significance. It might supply it with values that would otherwise be absent. It lends a sort of a tightness and a coherence and an internal consistency to it that might otherwise be absent if you didn't posit the God. Is this the sort of where you're going with that? Am I getting you right or not?
Part of it.
Okay.
Maybe part of it because I have no. My views used to be quite homogeneous and uniform, but not anymore because I'm a sort of undergoing and it's some sort of change. My views have changed a lot since like 2 years from now, from 2 years ago, something. But it's something like what you're saying, maybe. Why?
Well, I don't want to. I don't want to put.
Something,
No. I don't want to put words in your mouth. It's just that when you were mentioning that business about why I believe in Canada, and you said, well, it's because other people around you say that you live in Canada. That is, of course, a piece of the data. A huge piece of the data why I believe I'm sitting in Canada right now is, in fact, other people do that, do say that, do agree that I live in Canada. That and so one way to explain why everyone is saying that I'm in Canada is because I'm in fact in Canada, right? That is in fact a datum here, except that it's a question-begging one. So that wouldn't be pretty good. But
well, I have to disagree to some extent on that, Ozzy, because Canada is a socially defined concept as well. That a country exists in the minds of people. You're in a geographical location, and it's called Canada.
No, but it could be
so
submarine.
People.
Yeah,
well,
it could be
I feel like that's
submarine. Why do you believe you're in a submarine if I'm in a submarine?
Okay.
And everyone here thinks I'm in a submarine. But what I was saying is that it makes sense of my experience, my social experience. It makes sense of my lived experience. It makes sense of the fact that I go snowshoeing in winter, and if I lived in Brazil, that would make a lot of sense. If I'm at a low altitude, it just wouldn't make any sense that I can go snowshoeing and that sort of thing. So there's all these sorts of things that are made sense of by positing that I in fact am a resident of Canada. And similarly, I think for people who believe in God, a lot of them say, well, look, positing God knits together a whole set of things for me, not just my how I think everything got here, but why anything has value, my moral outlook, a whole set of things like this.
Well, I think, yeah, Ozzy, I believe you're in Canada. I think to say anything different, like it's a social construct, it's like when people say that's like when people say a married bachelor can't exist. And they're like, I can be married to a woman and have a bachelor's degree. That's stupid. Do you know what we're talking about or do you not? But I would like to maybe bring us full circle if I can. Real quick, someone's been yelling at me to say the universe is quantized. That's why there could be a God. Anyways, but for my own belief, I think we said this within the first like 15 minutes of, I think it was Ozzy or someone who said, rationale is based on the reasoning used to get to a conclusion. And if I put words in someone's mouth, sorry, correct me. But I'm pretty sure that's what we were going with. So I would say, my reasoning to get to the conclusion, why God, is, short and sweet. In over 3 decades of personal experience and, life experience, the totality of my existence screams, because God, to do anything differently would simply be intellectually dishonest. So we can go point by point, but I mean, it could take a lot. But I really think that's, I guess I'm asking you to take my word on it, but 3 decades, that's a lot of data to collect and analyze. So, if you believe I have a decent set of critical thinking skills and I employ logic and reason, whenever I can, and, I one step more, by the way, I'm also really highly skeptical of my own self and my own views because, maybe you want to call it ego or, I don't know, a little something. But, if I'm going to be wrong about something, I want to be the one that finds out I'm wrong so I can correct it before anyone else can tell me that I'm wrong. So I may be hypercritical of my own self. So all these things together, to me, and I think most people would agree that if what I just said is true, then that's an incredibly stringent, strict, rigorous reasoning to get to the conclusion I have. So I think that makes sense. The only thing now in question is, did I just tell the truth? I mean, I'm saying yes.
And do you have an accurate understanding?
I disagree with that completely, Nate. I do not have to impugn your honesty and your intellectual integrity to think that you have made errors in reasoning and arriving at a conclusion that, by my lights, can't be arrived at rationally. I don't have to impugn your intelligence. I don't have to impugn your integrity or honesty or anything of the sort. So I don't think that one can ever defend this position. I mean, one of us here in this discussion has got to be wrong. We can't both be right. We have an excluded middle here, so one of us is wrong here. And if you want to,
but how would we ever know that? I mean, we just
you're right. We have to debate the argument on its merits. We can't appeal to you. Just have to trust me that I'm a responsible agent.
We can't know anything about. So we're really just exercising our experience.
No, but we're not trying to establish veracity here. We're trying to establish the rationality.
We're not talking about if it is true that a God exists or not. We're talking about is it a justified belief
Well,
say
no,
that
it's
there
not a
is
justified
God.
belief, but it is a belief.
Well, that's an argument that
Is the
Ozzy and I,
well-
it seems like you're disagreeing with
justified depends
Ozzy and I,
upon
but
the
not-
justifiability of such a belief.
What did I
And,
start?
Yeah, but I would also say that although I would say that my belief in God offers me a certain sense of putting it all together and how it all makes sense and develop some sort of coherence that wouldn't be there if I didn't have that belief. Although I have that as an experience, I think I know enough about psychology to know that that's what everybody does with their paradigm.
Right.
So to me, that's unremarkable. That
would have been my objection.
Works that way is for me unremarkable and uncompelling and doesn't really offer for me, even for myself, it doesn't offer me an argument for justifying my belief.
Yeah, I would agree. That's sort of the objection that I would have raised to the proposal that I was putting forward earlier on behalf of a theist.
Right.
Well, I guess to add a little bit, at least, sorry, I get distracted for a second, but if we're talking about what I said, my statement wasn't to make it, incredibly what Bob just said, but it was simply to be like, this is reasonable, this is rational. It may not be like empirical evidence or that one would want, or an absolute, justified beyond all other, but it certainly makes the point I was making, which is this falls in the realm of rational.
And that's where I have to disagree with.
Can something be rational without empirical evidence? What do you think, for atheists? Can something be rational without empirical evidence?
Yes.
Do you get to a conclusion in a reasonable way?
So what was that question?
Yes.
I believe that my experience of life is valid.
Could be rational.
This is not some sort of test tube experimentation. I have no empirical evidence for that, but I don't think it's irrational for me to assume that
I don't think Ozzy and I disagreed, though. I think Ozzy and I both are perfectly comfortable saying that there can be rational beliefs that people hold without empirical evidence.
I would say there are huge swaths of such beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
The belief in our mathematical beliefs, for instance. You don't have to verify a mathematical equation unless it's supposed to describe reality. I mean, if you hit me with a sum, if you say 9,224 plus 1,762,000, and you say, go ahead, do the sum, and I do it. I don't have to then go and actually, amass a number of objects to those quantities and then count them to make sure that my sum is correct.
Isn't it interesting to note that we all can work algebraically with squares, circles, straight lines, and various other shapes, and yet in the entire universe, these shapes don't really exist anywhere.
Right, they're ideals, right? There are limits.
Like that. Yeah.
Okay, maybe, but that's not in the case of mathematics. That's not empirical evidence, but it's some different different kind of evidence.
For the cognitive process.
It is proof, actually.
Yes.
It is proof.
Right. It's absolute proof.
Right.
So it's scientific proof, but I'm not talking exactly about that. I'm saying, hey, I had experience. My family had experience. We continue to have that experience and relate experiences too. And those experiences, for me, can be better explained if there is something beyond what is scientifically demonstrable. There's something that's beyond what is just material, that is like acting upon us and acting upon people to do certain things to makes us try to do better and to do good for others. Can I?
But what makes you believe that it's true? Not just that the belief is beneficial, but why?
Going back at truth again. Where do we get to the point that we're, true is a big word. For one thing, for me
Bob, that's really what the question of this entire conversation is a rational belief in this context of if our hope is to have our beliefs as
that none of us know
reflect reality.
None of us know what the truth is. None of us do. So how can we be arguing
the question
about it?
comes is what gives us the confidence in the truth of it?
Well,
Right.
what gives you any confidence? We're both in the same position. Your confidence that that not believing in God is the best way to be, and my confidence that believing it is. What's the difference then?
No, here's the difference. Here's the difference.
Confidence in the belief that there is a God. This is a question of the ontological existence of an entity that is being posited here. This is not sort of I can't even describe that because all the words that I would come up with are ones that get used in theistic circles. But this is the question is if something exists, and there's standards of evidence that we use for any other claim for something that exists. If Russell's teapot is a great example, it's a classical example here in saying that essentially I could read his exact one here. If I were to suggest that between the Earth and Mars there is a China teapot revolving about the Sun in an elliptical orbit, nobody would be able to disprove my assertion, provided I were careful to add that the teapot is too small to be revealed even by our most powerful telescopes. But if I were to go on to say that since my assertion cannot be disproved, it is tolerable presumption on the part of human reason to
out
doubt
there
it.
who actually think that way, who use that as, oh, because I can.
That's essentially the argument you've been making all night, Bob.
No, it's
It's
not.
not irrational. I mean, it's not illogical. It's not self-contradictory. Therefore, it's acceptable.
The experiences that I've had are not experiences that just by coincidence happen to be there by, since the age of 6, having this constant sense of presence just
but maybe
happened to be
the
coincidental
experiences that you're
to
getting
the
is
fact
actually a
that
form of
while I'm
creation
at it, I
from
want
that
to
teapot.
believe in God just because I can. That itself is quite irrational.
But Bob, I mean, maybe the experiences that you're having are actually some sort of radio transmission or radiation that your body has a unique ability to perceive coming from this teapot orbiting the Sun between Earth and Mars.
No, which is more rational in your own opinion. Well, I don't want to rain on your parade too much, but I really think, the more transcendent point here is it seems that, at least the case and it sounds like Bob and maybe Will are making, is the chief reason why we believe it's rational to believe in a deity is the totality of our existence, basically. So, that
You haven't said a lot about the totality of your
I feel
the fact that
this will all make sense in a minute.
Based on form does not
really
mean all
want to finish.
syllogistic arguments are
Bob,
equally
can we
rational.
let Nate make this point here?
About to put a nice little bow on it. Okay, anyway, so the totality of our existence is what we're claiming. That in and of itself doesn't mean rational or irrational. It means that seems to be how we're kind of quantifying this. So, I think the best way to do this, which, can't really happen, or maybe you want to set up a study, but we'd have to take everyone in this panel, come up with the most totality of our life that we could, point by point, and talk about it, and say, okay, this is the evidence, this is evidence, and decide, is it more rational to believe in a deity based on this or not? And the same would have to be done with, Oz and Greg, and say, look, are you an irrational atheist because the totality of your life, is very rational why you don't believe in a deity? Or would we say the totality of your life, yeah, that makes sense, that's rational. So I don't think there's an easy way to do this, but I think that may be the best way to do it.
There's no way to decide
Greg,
the veracity of the issue this way. The question is, which of us has a better reason for thinking that his or her conclusion with respect to theism is better warranted? And Nate, you keep talking about the totality of your experience without ever specifying what it is in your experience you think is better explained and better made sense of by positing a God than not doing so. And you have not stated how it is better explained by positing this entity.
Why would he even need to, though?
Well, Bob,
that's what would warrant the belief. That's what.
No. That would not warrant the belief. That would warrant the belief to you. That's a different issue.
It's what should warrant a belief to anyone is the positing an entity gives you a reason.
I disagree with you. Each human being comes from such a set of experiences and understanding of how the world is categorized and made sense
Bob,
of.
What you're making is an argument that
common sense. We don't share a common set of warranted sufficiencies. We really don't.
Okay, that's epistemological nihilism, what you're proposing there, Bob. What you're saying is the evidentiary standards are different for every person. If there are no evidentiary standards that we can...
I didn't say there are none. I didn't say there are none. But the closer you get to the immaterial, the more you're getting to where there are none. And just
right. And
so
if
this is radically different than
a more and more difficult belief to hold.
Yeah, the closer you get to there being none is the closer you are to there having no reason to believe it at all.
But Oz, you talked about, like, I keep saying there's totality and I never give a reason. If I give one reason, what's that going to do? That's going to do exactly what Bob did.
But you can characterize your the experience.
Well, Bob did this. So for Bob's life, he gave one experience. Is that rational or irrational? Well, we talked a little bit about it. Okay, it sounds like you're going to say Bob's belief on his theism is based on this one experience, even though he's got 62 more years.
No, that's not at all.
That's not at all. That's not at all fair. That's not what I did.
Just one little bit. This is to Greg. Greg.
Yes.
Is it statistically possible, in the whole set of possible experiences that a human being can experience, to have in the whole world, the population of the world, one person whose set of live experiences are better explained by positing a God? Is that statistically possible?
Is it statistically, as in logically possible? Is it because I would say that
not logically.
Statistically, yes, there would be ways in which such a thing could be.
Okay. So that person, would he be an irrational person?
No, but this is an extreme hypothetical at this point. To say that that person, because in granting that it's statistically possible that somebody could potentially possibly have a proper warrant, but the point here I'm making, but I'm making this as sort of a logical argument, William, is that there is a possible set of circumstances that are logically possible. I've never seen anybody attest to this. I've never seen real evidence that this has happened, nor do I expect to. But yes, there are possible sets of evidence that could lead to the conclusion, and as the best conclusion, that there is in fact a God. And my argument here in saying that theism is irrational is that has not yet been presented. And
not to you. You have no idea if that has been.
Because I've spent years studying and searching for that to be presented.
Well, and that's wonderful, and that's marvelous that you've done that.
But
at the same time, you have no experience but your own with which to evaluate the outcome of all that. You know.
But wait a minute. That's a truism. Everyone has to evaluate the evidence that they have.
Correct.
No one can evaluate the evidence that they don't have. Right? And everyone has to assess the question of the existence of God based on whatever concept of God they happen to be carrying around in their head. That's true, okay? But whether or not something is rational or not is whether or not you've got, in fact, evidence that sufficient to warrant the belief. The kind of evidence that you need is relative to the kind of entity or the character of the belief in question.
I totally agree with that.
That sounds like Hitchens' razor.
Now, the difficulty for William's objection here, though, is it seems to me that it sounds like he's arguing, isn't it possible that somebody has experiences that warrant such a belief? Nobody here is denying the possibility of
then you can't deny the rationality of it either. They go hand in hand.
No. This is merely to say that it's not logically impossible that there could be evidence for God. Of course, you know what else is possible? It's possible that every other person has evidence that is absolutely unimpugnable and unassailable, but they're just not telling us. That too is logically possible. That's not self-contradictory. But I don't have any good reason to think it.
Well, no, you don't, and so you shouldn't think that. I would think that the most irrational thing that Ozzy could ever do is believe in God. You can't do it rationally. You do not possess based on where you're at, given the nature of this question, and given the fact that we can't even establish what evidence is required for the question.
No, you can't. The believers can't provide establish the conditions for verification and falsification.
Well, then guess what?
Which is why it's not a good thing to.
You can't establish the requirements. How do you know I haven't met them?
Oh, no, that's you. That's the burden of evidence that you've got. It doesn't. It's
I
not a
don't have
failure
any
of.
burden.
It is not a failure or shortcoming of my position if you, Bob, or any theist is unable to specify the conditions of verification
It is
for
not
Only-
their
shortcoming
belief.
on my part
Except,
any manner whatsoever, unless I'm trying to compel you to also believe. If I'm not trying to compel you to also believe, I have no burden of any sort.
yes, you do. You have a burden to be as a responsible epistemic agent to yourself. It has nothing to do with what's required to convince me.
I have for myself more than sufficient comfort with the fact that I have wrestled with this question long and hard, have been very honest about the ability to be deceived, and that's why I am an agnostic in many ways. But so I am very convinced that I am far more satisfied for very, very good reasons that my conclusion is well warranted, even though it isn't for you, and that's fine. I'm not bothered by that in the least. So I have a hard time. I can see where Greg and Ozzy can claim that this kind of a belief would be the most irrational thing you could ever come up with, but I don't.
No, that's not
given
my
the
view.
nature
That's
of
not my
this
view.
question, I don't see where you can then cross over and imply anything about that concerning theists at all.
Okay, I certainly don't think that for me or for anyone, belief in God is the most irrational thing that you can come up with. I mean, one could believe a manifest
I
contradiction.
used to be a Republican, so I can agree with you with that.
Anybody could believe a manifest contradiction and even recognize that it's a contradiction and sort of be perversely insistent that it's correct and sincerely believe that, and that would be, of course, sort of maximally irrational. My view is not that you're sort of venturing into some kind of madness here. My view is that even by your own lights, I don't think you have good reason to believe what you say you find convincing. And the reason is that because of the reason that the character of the reason that you've given me in terms of these subjective experiences, such as a sense of the presence of otherness. That's why I gave the example of the phantom limb pain. It seems to me you're able to say you can't deny that you have the experience. It's the object that you think the experience is occasioned by or caused by. That's what you don't have. You don't have any way to connect one with the other.
Okay, so here we are. Here's my problem. I admit I cannot come up with a rational justification for believing in God, but I cannot come up with a rational justification for not believing in God.
But
I really can't.
I
can make
an
argument rationally.
Let
me just finish what I'm saying. I can't rationally come up with an argument for either position, but in addition to that, I have this experience.
Let me give you one. Why I think you shouldn't. Why it makes more sense not to believe it. Okay, as we said, if someone were to say, "Well, I believe in God," simply because you can't disprove it. It's not. That's
not why. That has nothing to do.
I know. I'm saying if one were to say that would be no good. That's setting the bar too low, right? Okay. So what that means is there's a whole set of things that one could believe in that are logically possible. The problem is that the set of things that could be true is greater than the set of things that are true, because
that's a problem. But it's too damn bad that it's a problem. It is a problem, but you can't dismiss that problem. You can just say,
I'm not dismissing the problem.
It's not worth my time to work with.
I'm not dismissing the problem. That is in fact a problem that is not to be dismissed. That's precisely my point. The set of things, the propositions that are true, is a subset of the propositions that could be true, because the ones that could be true, some of them happen to be true. Okay. So the set of actually true propositions is a subset of all possibly true positions. Okay. The problem is within the set of logically possible positions, you have mutually contradictory and conflicting positions. So we have to have a reason, have evidence to sift through.
The argument you seem to be making here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that psychologically speaking, we hold beliefs for reasons that are not necessarily justified in any way based on reason or rationality, and therefore that's permissible. This is sort of a psychological argument.
It depends on the nature of the question. It depends on the nature of the question. If there are some things that are beyond, I mean, there either is or isn't a God.
Well, can I ask a question?
There's no middle ground on this, and this is a real problem, and the fact that there are a lot of difficulty in fettering it out, and even what Ozzy's talking about here, the fact that in that set of possibilities there are mutually exclusive issues, that's true, which means that we're entering into real dangerous, ridiculous grounds, but unfortunately there is nothing that we can do to resolve that particular problem other than to just say, well,
But there's plenty of things we can do. We can apply standards of evidence.
Yeah, evidence and reasons is what we use.
What sort of standard of evidence are you going to have concerning God? There is no standard of evidence. Zilch, zero, and that's true.
Exactly.
Without let's say for the sake of argument. Let's just say for the sake of argument, there is a God. What standard of evidence you could come up with? Let's just for the sake of argument, let's say there's a God.
That's a good question. That's a great question.
Oh, well, that's a good question. That's a question every theist needs to answer. What constitutes actual evidence and reason for believing in this God? And if it turns out it's as you say, Bob, that there is no evidence, that there is no reason to be given here, that is rational, that it is irrational, then if it's irrational or pre-rational or non-rational, whatever you want, then it's not rational. It is not a warranted belief.
Maybe you didn't understand what I said when I said there's no evidence here.
Nate has something he'd like to say on this too.
There is no evidence to push this in either direction. Zilch.
Well, I had a question.
Which is why we don't think that there's a justification to make the leap from not to.
There's no more justification for not.
But someone could answer that question. What's the evidence that you would need to believe there's a God?
But it depends on which God we're talking about. A Zeus-like God.
A creator, something that created the universe, for example. A guy, hey, this is hello, I created the universe.
I have no idea what the conditions of verification are for that, because that claim is so vague. That claim is so vague as to not even be a claim about reality.
Well, can I ask you a question, Oz?
Yeah.
So once upon a time, many moons ago, when you believed in God, now looking back, do you think that was the most irrational thing I did, or do you still hold that your reasoning was rational? You just for some reason lost a belief.
No, I was rational, but my arguments were not. Like I was operating under false premises, right? I had false beliefs that I took to be true. In other words, the input in my reasoning in the equation. I mean, reasoning is sort of a garbage in, garbage out process. If you start with false premises, and so I started with a bunch of false premises. Had the premises been true, I would still hold those beliefs.
This is why I think one of the major reasons why former believers become atheists, because their belief was based upon premises. There are many people whose belief is not based upon such premises, and as a result, any premise that falls apart simply falls apart. They don't necessarily end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater, even though they change the water.
To respond as well to that, hey, you know what? Now I've completely drawn a mental blank now out of nowhere. Never mind. I don't want to respond to that because I forgot what it was.
I'd be happy to respond to Bob's challenge about what is the sort of the evidence against. The evidence against is not against evidence that establishes anything like the impossibility of a God, right? None of the atheists here, the two of us, suggest that God is logically impossible, right? Any more than any of the theists here are insisting that God is logically necessary, right? It's an issue of whether belief is warranted, but what warrants a belief has to be evidence that implies that the deity in question is real, as opposed to facts happen to be consistent with it. Because anything that is possible, okay, there will be facts that are consistent with it. If there isn't, if there were none, if there were no facts that were consistent with it, then you'd be left with actually something that was actually contradicted by facts. In the case of a God belief, if it turns out that there's no more evidence to believe in God than to believe in two gods, three gods, a zillion gods, gods that themselves are subordinate to other gods, right? Meta-gods. super duper gods, beyond the gods, okay, then this is the position that we're in. Are we to believe this? Are these all equally rational positions?
I can't imagine
Are they all
any
equally
of the
warranted?
rational positions. And when you say to be believed, to me that also is I can't identify with that. The what I believe is not anything that
I think
consider
we've
something that
established
is
here,
to
though,
be
on more
believed.
than one occasion that you've basically just said that you're not applying standards of rationality to your beliefs. I mean, you stated explicitly, you agreed again that you believe that it's irrational. So I think Nate wants to make an argument that it is rational, and I'd like to respond to the point that he made with that I remembered what he said. Asking Ozzy about if his beliefs were the most irrational thing he's ever done, or if he was irrational at that point. I tried to qualify when I opened the show here in saying that it's not, in saying that a belief is an irrational belief does not mean that you are an irrational person.
Right.
This is not a personal attack being made or saying that you are crazy. We're not. This is not Richard Dawkins and the God delusion here. This is simply us saying that a rational has a philosophical definition, and that definition is not met by theistic beliefs. That the process by which they are come to and the standards of evidence being held for them do not meet a sufficient.
How does the human brain develop a sense
But again,
of
that's the
rationality?
psychology argument.
How does the human brain?
Psychology is not philosophy, Bob.
What's that?
Psychology is not philosophy, though. You're making a psychology argument, saying how does the human brain come to these, and that's neither here nor there. This
really?
is
so in other words, you don't want to allow a psychological discussion in terms of the whether or not belief in God is rational. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think we can certainly include how the human psychology interprets evidence, and it does draw into these things. But I think that
rationale is what I'm saying is.
I feel though what you're trying to argue is a God.
No, the human brain cannot determine something to be rational or irrational without doing it in some paradigm of human brain processing. And I'm saying if you can define that, then maybe we can determine whether or not we could consider something to be irrational by the way that it somehow violates the way the brain operates. And so just because we have a definition for irrationality, if that definition, and many definitions are inconsistent with how the brain actually works, then maybe we're really being impractical and dishonest with our own nature as human beings.
Well, I don't see how. We're getting some feedback from someone there. I'm not sure I understand the point of the psychology here, Bob. I mean, our brains work the way they work. We're sort of slaves to our neurochemistry here.
This is correct.
We all have to assume that our mental faculties are in proper working order whenever we're arriving at a conclusion. That is, we simply assume that until we find out that something has gone wrong, and barring evidence that something is not working correctly, we just assume that everything is working correctly. And I want to echo Greg's point that when we say that we think that a belief is irrational, we mean that we don't think that the person has arrived at it correctly, that they've made inferential errors somewhere along the way. To say that a belief is irrational, or that people are theists are irrational, is not to say they're systematically irrational. It's not like when you call a person a liar, right? We've all told lies, but that doesn't mean that we're all liars, right? Because unless you're because the word
because what's wrong with either of you can show me where my inferences have gone astray?
Oh, well, I gave you an example earlier. There's a non sequitur between how do you say it? A sense of the presence of otherness. Okay, there's a gap there between that sense and the object that you think occasions it, just like the phantom limb pain. That's why I gave that example, right? You can have a sense of something.
There is a gap, or there may be a gap.
No, there is, in fact, there's a logical gap. It's not to say that there is no God. There could be a God without you having the sense, and you can have the sense without having a God, which is why there's a gap.
But just like the question about Canada,
then it wouldn't be irrational.
What about the people that is saying the same, that is having the experiences that are comparable to Bob's? And what about the traditions that comes, I don't know, since where? Because we seem to be wired to believe in gods. What about that?
Well, there's in fact no evidence that we're wired to believe in
There
God.
is evidence.
No. That is a huge leap, a huge inferential leap. Okay, what there is, without
Cognitive biases.
are cognitive biases, and I use the word cognitive bias without prejudice here. Okay, there are cognitive biases that leave us disposed to construe certain kinds of experiences and events in terms of telos, teleology, agency, that sort of thing.
That's what I'm implying, actually.
Yeah, we're replete with those. Now, God.
We're wired to believe there
wired
is
to
some
makes it sound
sort
like we're
of
designed to.
agency
Right. That
is
itself
behind
is
natural phenomena.
But that is already begging the question. To say that we are wired to, no, we are in fact built in such a way that we are disposed to read agency and intentionality and telos into events, including inanimate objects. My car won't start. I get mad at it.
We see patterns that aren't really there.
You're putting it like a side effect. What I'm saying is that
No, I'm not. I'm saying to characterize it as designed to is to say that we are designed to do something is decidedly prejudicial. To characterize
I'm not talking about design here. I'm just saying that we are wired to read agency in things that are not.
Humans have the tendency to do that. Is that what you're saying? Is that psychologically speaking, humans have the tendency?
Right. But that has a reason to be.
Wiredness.
That gives us evolutionary advantages.
Yes, it's those evolutionary advantages that actually vitiates any intuition that this was put into us, right? The fact that
I don't say that way, but okay.
That sounds like spin to me.
Well, no, it could be. There's a way to present that argument that's going to sound needlessly dismissive, right? The problem is that William, what I was objecting to was when you use the word wired to. Wired is one thing, but really wired to is just a way of saying our brains work in such a way that we are disposed to impute and ascribe agency, intentionality, and purpose into systems that don't even have them, such as inanimate objects and systems. And consequently, we do that for the universe. We read purpose, intentionality, and agency into everything. It's sort of how our brains work. It is a mental disposition that we have. There are, in fact, evolutionary theories about possible beneficial side effects, pro-social behaviors, and stuff like that for why, but we don't know that that's true. We don't know that there were selective pressures acting on us. That is speculation.
And I can concede that is a very problematic and genuine comeback.
Yeah, and I have to concede that the people who sort of insist that evolutionary explanation has to be right are arguing that it has to be right on the basis that they want to avoid a certain conclusion, which is what you were talking about with Steven Pinker's book, How the Mind Works. I agree with that completely.
We find ourselves backed and painted into corners that we don't even know how we got there.
Yeah. So in all of these arguments about personal subjective experiences, the difficulty that I have is there's this inferential gap between the experience and the object of the experience. Now, of course, all our experiences are subjective, available only to us, and non-transferable. When I look at a red fence, I'm having a visual experience of a red fence. How do I establish that the red fence isn't just in my mind? Well, I go over and I touch it. Okay, but how do you know that you're not having some grand hallucination? Oh, well, then I have to avail myself of intersubjective agreement from other people, and that's how we do these sorts of things. The difficulty is that with the subjective experiences of what people call religious experiences, the intersubjective agreement that we get never goes beyond the experience. There's never an independent way of corroborating that there is this cause that occasions the experience. That's what's missing. That's what's
called belief.
Well, I think that's why it should be called unwarranted belief.
Okay,
That's
well,
the difference where I would.
there's a sense here in which I would say I can agree with you, but however, I do believe that the degree of warranted required before a belief is considered irrational depends upon the nature of the belief we're talking about and what it is we're talking about. Yeah, and of course, what a person makes of that belief and what they do about that belief is also, I think, a very important and interesting question.
Yeah, Bob, everything hinges on what you think is implied by the God concept. That is what determines any putative conditions of verification and falsification. And unfortunately, I think that's where things can fall apart. You can have a
Right.
concept that's nice
and that's where the abuse begins.
Yeah, yeah. But I think there's also there are evasive maneuvers that happen here. And where people define the concept so vaguely as to rob the concept of any means of identifying, even subjectively, conditions of verification or falsification. And when you do that, you rob yourself, when you posit a God that's that vague, you rob yourself of any reason to believe it, any rational reason to believe it. You can, of course, have reasons to believe things. The question is, do you have good reasons to believe them? And that's what I worry about with this move about the concept of God might be irrational. If it's irrational, then I think by definition it isn't even a warranted belief.
Certainly not warranted by those mechanisms of rationality. Yeah.
It's time for me to jump in. This has been a wonderful show, and I need final thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Darryl. You haven't said anything yet.
Let me just say I apologize. I had a power stutter there, so that's I didn't just rage quit on you guys.
Okay, so it's time to hear from the simpler one. My head is spinning. A lot of this conversation is far too intellectual for me, but nonetheless I'm enjoying it, and I do have something I would like to say. I'm a little bit surprised that this one particular word hasn't come up tonight, and maybe it just needs to come from someone like me, and that is the term love. You know, I believe in love. I believe in kindness. I believe in compassion, and a lot of other things that are synonymous. And it's not something that in my understanding, can be measured, that can be proven, other than just by certain actions of the one who's experiencing it. But while I'm sitting here thinking about this, I was thinking that on the one hand, it may seem irrational that two people, such as, for example, my wife and I, can have so much feeling, so much compassion, so much love for one another, and yet at the same time, it's almost irrational to me that others aren't trying to kill me so that they can have this, because it's such a wonderful thing. I can say that, and with full confidence that what I'm saying is true. You know, that it's very real. And you know, when I think of something as wonderful as that, and I realize that out of all the things that have been said tonight, and I agree with most of it, with the theistic side and the atheistic side, but it boils down to until we get the concrete evidence that puts everybody on the same side, saying yes, there is some sort of God, no, there isn't a God. When I look at this immeasurable thing that we can call, I'm just going to call it love, and I can see the power of it, the way that it seems to, when it's implemented, when it's there, when it's being manifested, if you will, how it pulls people together. It causes this wonderful reaction to take place. I would, until it can be proven otherwise, I would lean toward a God like that, in some form or another, whether it's something that exists within each and every one of us, or something that is beyond us. But I would think there just has to be something greater than ourselves that caused all this to come into being. And that's just my personal viewpoint, and I understand that that's pretty much where it lies until, as I've stated, and as I think we all understand, that there's the concrete evidence that says, yes, there is modalism.
William Caicedo Torres, there has been a little bit of heat tonight. It's been good heat. What are your thoughts? Quickly.
Time's up.
Okay, thank you. Please bear with me because you know that English is not my native tongue, so we have to wait a little bit before saying it. I don't see how to posit the creator that is transcendent to every method of verification that we have. It's inaccessible to all of those methods. It's a vague claim about reality. I side with Bob when he says it's just too damn bad. I can see how for some people that leap of faith between an actual experience and that creator can be totally unjustified. That's one of the reasons I don't debate anymore in the way I used to debate before. But it's still something that is very evident to me. But I understand that that is only my perception of it. Number two, given that it is statistically possible to find a person that have had a set of experiences that are best that make the best sense positive in a God, it seems to me that it's very difficult to say that that person or the person that believes in a God is being irrational. When Ozzy was a theist or he believed in a God, he said that he wasn't an irrational person because he was just processing some premises that he was given to. So how can we say that a person is irrational because has made sense of his experiences and the best explanation for them is that there is a God? I see that it's not a rational thing to do to call that person that he as an irrational person or that's an irrational belief. And just to finish, I hope the next time we do this, we do it in Spanish, so to kick the butt, all of you guys, kick your butts.
I
okay,
have like 7 or 8 words in that language that I can use easily. So.
Yeah, Spanish.
I believe that those are the bad words.
Hey, Spanish would be nice. Nate, you've done a good job tonight. I wanted to hear more from you, so put something on the table real quick. We have to end the show, but I want you to go for it real quick.
Well, I think it's an interesting topic. I think it's a really intense, in-depth topic that we need to do our due diligence in exploring it. So, I think to decide if a belief, regardless of subject matter, is rational or irrational, we need to use our subjectivity and really analyze the belief or set of beliefs that form an opinion. So, it's really intense. It's not to skirt the issue. It's not to cleverly be evasive. It's really to dig in and address this. Fortunately, Hang Out on Airs can go for 8 hours now, and so I would love to continue exploring this. I even have the couch behind me that I can volunteer to analyze people on. So we really need to find out what the
There's another animal in that role,
and what the anyway, and that's part of it. That's brains of the operation. Anyway, so I think we really need to analyze the belief or set of beliefs that form one's conclusion and decide subjectively, as a group, as a consensus, whatever, is this rational or irrational? I don't see a quicker way to do it than just have a slumber party and dig in and go for it. I'm done.
Greg, I asked you to be on tonight, and this has turned out to be a lot better than what I thought it was going to be. And so we're going to have round two, not tonight, but either Sunday night or next Wednesday night. We're going to have to do this because we're not finished with this conversation.
Well,
what are your final thoughts? Come on, talk to me.
How important that holiday is for me because it's the day that my Lord was risen. But when he came out of the cave and laid an egg that hatched a bunny, I think is what happened there. But
I love chocolate. What is it? A bunny rabbit ears. I love to eat the ears off first. There's something wrong with me. Go for it, Greg.
Okay, well, I wanted to say that I understand that the language I used at the beginning of this show and sort of leading up to the show, it sparks sort of an emotional response, and it triggers sort of a defensive response in many ways, and I get that. Unfortunately, I don't know any other words that sort of carry the same meaning that don't have that don't have these other connotations that come along with them. And when I say that it is irrational to hold this belief, I am very specifically speaking about the process through which a person must go to hold any belief, and how, or if there was a process. As Bob pointed out, sometimes we hold beliefs for entirely different reasons, psychological reasons. Sort of the as Ozzy, I think, taught me the term doxastic voluntarism is kind of up in the air. We don't really think that beliefs are entirely voluntary for people to come by, but I think that's why it is so important, as Nate and I discussed, to analyze our beliefs and to see and constantly check them and test them to see if they are properly grounded and justified. And as I've heard Bob and William both pretty openly admit here, is that there's not any real standards of evidence even for how we could justify this belief in God, that it is a leap of faith. It's something that is irrational. It is not a conclusion that we come to through the process of reason in the same way that we could do so for the existence of a different sort of entity that exists within this reality. And that's a really significant difference that we kind of have to recognize, that we are making a leap, and we're jumping to a conclusion that the steps in the middle are not there. And that is the criticism that I'm making. When I say that God is, or belief in a God is irrational, I'm saying that there is no way that we can take the evidence available to us right now. And as William pointed out, it's possible that somebody else has more evidence that simply has not yet been presented. If that's the case, I look forward to it being presented. But the evidence that is available to us right now does not logically lead to the conclusion that there is a God, or even a greater than or 50% or greater confidence in the conclusion that there is a God when properly weighted.
I really think that this conversation needs to continue for quite some time, because I think that there is so much that theists and atheists alike need to examine that is in this kind of conversation. I think this is an extremely useful conversation, and I would like to ask
Do I get a final word?
Just a minute, Bob. I want to ask you and Ozzy if you guys would have one of those healthy exchanges like you were having during the show once again. I mean, you guys were going back and forth in a very meaningful way. It was awesome, and I love it.
We're going to have another Bozzy battle?
No, Ozzy and Bob were going back and forth with various things. I thought that it was wonderful, and so I'm going to pick on you, put you on the spot just for a moment. Give it your best shot for about 3 or 4 minutes. Can you guys?
Okay. I don't know. I mean, we've pretty much push it out. I don't know if we can do it like on command or for show, but I'll tell you, I do think that Ozzy is one of the most clear-headed thinkers I've ever known. I gotta admire the guy tremendously, and he's gives people plenty of pause.
Well, let me return the favor, because or the compliment anyway. Sorry to disappoint you, Dr. Jones. But Bob and I are going to kiss and make up now. Bob is exquisitely rational and intelligent, and this is why I'm confident that I'm not sort of slyly insulting him or anyone when I say I think that theism is an irrational conclusion. If someone as intelligent and articulate and knowledgeable about human psychology, human motivations, and that sort of thing, can believe in theism and espouse it as and defend it as strongly as he can, that proves that the fact that by my lights it's an irrational conclusion doesn't mean you have to be an irrational person. Bob to me is sort of the paradigm of a reasonable, intelligent, rational, clear-thinking, responsible epistemic agent. I just happen to think he's wrong in this conclusion. I don't think he's reasoned his way to the right conclusion. He thinks I'm wrong in the way I've reasoned to my conclusion, strictly speaking. That is my conclusion that he is irrational. He thinks I'm incorrect in thinking that he's irrational, but he doesn't think I'm irrational in thinking that there's no God. He thinks that is a rational conclusion. So we disagree there. There's an asymmetry there. But I mean, I have absolutely loved this. This has been terrific fun with all of you, and I really appreciate sort of the goodwill. This really should be the model for how these discussions can go, with people sort of trying to take seriously the other person's position and not trying to second guess their motives and insult them and anything like that. I thought this was terrific fun. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you, William, Nate, and Bob, for a great discussion.
I think it's been wonderful. We're going to do this again quickly, maybe in a couple of minutes. I'm joking. Bob, did you have any other words to say?
Yeah, I think that it was an awesome discussion. We really we fed out a lot of things. I think that that I can deeply appreciate even some of the issues that are raised against concepts of belief. If I could summarize it in perhaps an unfair way, unfortunate to have the last word, that there's something here that I might even label a fear of jumping. We're dealing with something that is, by its very nature, an extremely difficult issue to talk about, and we have to. I think we have to appreciate the fact that where each of us think it's time to jump is going to be for each of us a different time, and in which direction. But I think that both of these directions end up being a jump that people justify for. Let's be honest. I think sometimes we justify this jump for reasons we're not really necessarily in touch with. So, but it's awesome that we can have this kind of a conversation and participate in it and do it with fettering this out, because only by discussing it can we be honest about the strengths, the weaknesses, and feel good about whether or not we have, at least to the degree we're able to be responsible, whether or not we've handled it as well as we can. And even if we've handled it as well as we can, there's no guarantee that any of us possess the competence required for this particular question. So, it's been awesome. I'm so glad that NCG is doing this kind of thing, because it's wonderful. Maybe it's going to give some people some troubled faith. I think that maybe their faith needs to be troubled. Might give some atheists some troubled disbelief. I don't know, but let's just have at it and continue talking.
I am so enjoying the kind of fire that we have. It seems to purify, in a sense. It seems to bring us to a more honest place. And so this is the place of intellectual, spiritual, and book honesty. And I'm so glad that atheists and theists alike can gather together and make sense to one another. And so If you're interested in joining the Cult of Honesty, join us. Get involved in the movement. We're trying to move forward, and we need you. Bye-bye.